At the recent peak, America lost over 110,000 people to overdoses in a year. Across America, the street is changing. Fentanyl made the supply unpredictable. Xylazine made wounds harder to heal. Meth made sleep feel dangerous. Prescription opioids turned ordinary pain into dependence. And beneath every drug name is one question. What happens when a person needs treatment, but the only place left for him is outside? Tonight we follow Daniel, 39, a composite character drawn from public reporting, health data outreach patterns, and people surviving homelessness and substance use. Daniel still wears a hospital wristband. It proves someone saw him once. It does not prove anyone could keep him alive. And that is where this story begins. Not with the drug, with the door that closed after treatment ended. On the surface, America still looks built for rescue. Hospitals glowing at midnight, pharmacies on corner lots, ambulances cutting through traffic, treatment centers with intake forms, and doctors trained to keep bodies alive. But behind those doors, another America waits. Outside sidewalks, tents, motel rooms, train platforms, abandoned buildings, and people recovering with no bed. That is where Daniel lives now. Not inside the hospital, not fully outside the crisis. Somewhere between the two. The wristband is soft at the edges. The letters are fading. To someone passing by, it may look like trash he forgot to remove. To Daniel, it is proof. Proof that he made it to an emergency room. Proof that a nurse asked his name. Proof that someone wrote something into a chart. But the wristband does not say where he slept after discharge. It does not say whether he got medication, whether the shelter had room, whether withdrawal started before the paperwork ended, or whether the wound on his arm could stay clean outside. That is the gap this video follows. Not the moment when the system touches someone. The moment after it lets go. Because for people living outside, treatment is not only a medical question, it is a geography question. Where do you go after the hospital? Where do you rest while your body is sick? Where do you keep antibiotics if you have no room? Where do you recover if the sidewalk is the only place still open? Daniel keeps looking at the wristband because it reminds him of something almost cruel. Help existed. He reached it, and somehow he is still outside. That is how the street becomes the emergency room. Before we go deeper, tell us where you are watching from. In your city, does addiction show up in shelters, sidewalks, emergency rooms, parks, train stations, or somewhere people try not to see? Because addiction does not happen in a vacuum. Homelessness does not happen in a vacuum either. When the two overlap, every part of life becomes harder to stabilize. A person trying to recover needs sleep, but the street does not always let you sleep. A person trying to recover needs medication, but medication can be stolen, lost, confiscated, or impossible to store. A person trying to recover needs follow-up care, but follow-up care assumes a phone, an address, transportation, and enough stability to make it back at the right time. Recovery is not only a decision, it is a sequence of doors. And if one door closes too early, the next one may never open. So hold this question as we move forward. What traps someone first? The drug, the withdrawal, the trauma, the street, or the shame that keeps a person from asking again after help already failed once? Put your answer in the comments. Later in this story, we will come back to it, because the thing that traps Daniel may not be the thing most people blame first. The first name in this story is fentanyl, but the point is not the name. The point is what it changed. For years, addiction on the street was already dangerous. Then fentanyl changed the math. It made the drug supply more unpredictable. A dose became harder to understand. One bag could look like another, while the risk inside was completely different. It could be mixed into heroin counterfeit pills, or something the person did not expect. When the supply becomes unpredictable, survival becomes harder to plan. Daniel describes it like weather, something that can change before he is ready, something that turns fear into panic, something that makes every decision feel smaller than the need inside his body. The wristband came from one of those nights. He had not slept. His wound looked worse. His stomach turned. His hands shook. He told himself he needed treatment. He told himself he would stay. But by the time paperwork, waiting withdrawal, fear, noise, and shame stacked together, help began to feel far away, even while he was inside the building. That is one of the cruelest parts of this crisis. A hospital can be close, treatment can exist, Narcan can be in someone's backpack, and still the person can be trapped between the fear of dying and the fear of withdrawal. Fentanyl did not create homelessness. Homelessness did not create fentanyl. But together they created a new kind of street emergency where a person can need medical care, addiction treatment, shelter, wound care, transportation, and patience all at the same time. And once Daniel is outside again, the wristband does not protect him. It only proves he was close to help once, but close is not safe. And as fentanyl changed the risk of overdose, another drug began changing what survival looked like on the body itself. Then came another name, xylazine. On the street, some people call it Tranq. It is not an opioid. That matters because Narcan can reverse an opioid overdose. Narcan can pull someone back when fentanyl slows breathing. But xylazine complicates the picture. When it is mixed into fentanyl, a person may be sedated, difficult to wake, or barely moving. On the street, uncertainty can become deadly. Daniel has seen it. Those questions should not belong to strangers on a sidewalk. They should belong to a medical system. But when the street becomes the emergency room, bystanders become the first alarm. Xylazine also changed the body in another way. Wounds. Not every wound comes from one cause. Not every infection has the same story. But outreach teams and clinicians in many cities have seen severe skin wounds connected to the changing drug supply. A person indoors can be told to keep a wound clean. Daniel hears that and almost laughs. Clean where? With what sink? With what bathroom? With what bandage supply? With what bed where no one steals the backpack holding the gauze? This is where medicine and homelessness collide. The doctor can give instructions. The discharge papers can list the steps. But the street does not behave like a recovery room. Daniel's wristband says he was seen. The wound on his arm asks a harder question. Was he able to heal? Because treatment is not only the moment a doctor touches the wound, it is everything that happens after clean water dressing, changes a ride back, a safe place to rest, and someone who checks again tomorrow. Without those things, a medical problem becomes a street problem. A street problem becomes an emergency. The emergency room sees him again. The wristband gets replaced by another wristband. That is the loop. And while fentanyl and xylazine can pull the body down, another drug can keep it awake for a different kind of survival. Methamphetamine pushes the body in the opposite direction. Awake, alert, restless, afraid. For people indoors, sleep is recovery. For people outside, sleep can feel like exposure. Daniel has slept on a train platform, in a stairwell beside a wall, in a shared motel room, and in an abandoned building where every sound might mean someone else is coming in. That is part of what makes stimulants so complicated in this crisis. But outside the reason someone uses may not be only escape. Sometimes it is survival logic bent into a dangerous shape. Stay awake, stay moving, do not lose the bag, do not get hurt, survive until morning. That logic does not make the drug safe. It makes the crisis clearer. Daniel talks about meth like a loan from tomorrow. The energy comes now. The cost comes later. A shaking hand, a racing heart, a mind that cannot settle, a body that has forgotten how to rest. And when the crash comes, the street is still there. No bed, no locked door, no quiet place to come down. This is why addiction cannot be separated from housing. Recovery needs sleep. Sleep needs safety. Safety needs more than a warning about drugs. It needs a door that locks. And as meth shows how the street changes the reason people use, the next part of the crisis shows how the supply changes the risk people think they understand. The danger is no longer only what someone thinks they are choosing. Sometimes the danger is what the supply hides. A person may believe they are using a stimulant, avoiding opioids, and know their tolerance. But if the supply is contaminated, the body is no longer responding to the drug the person thought they took. That unpredictability travels. That is why contaminated supply matters in a homelessness story. The person outside has fewer protections when something goes wrong, no stable address for follow-up care, no clean place to recover, no easy way to say, this was not what I thought it was. For Daniel, the drug names matter less than the pattern. Something enters the body reacts. The street decides whether anyone notices in time. And behind the modern contaminated supply is an older crisis America never fully escaped. Before fentanyl became the word everyone feared, there was another word America already knew: heroin. For years, heroin carried the image of the opioid crisis: needles, alleys, withdrawal, lost families, people disappearing into a substance that promised relief and delivered dependence. The modern crisis did not erase heroin. It folded heroin into something more unpredictable. Some people still look for heroin. Some believe they are buying it. Some use the word because it is the word they know. But on the street, the label does not always tell the truth. The supply can change faster than the person using it. Heroin matters here because it represents a cycle deeper than one drug. Pain, relief, dependence, withdrawal, shame, isolation, loss. Then the street, then more pain, then the same cycle again, colder and harder to escape. Daniel was not born wanting to live like this. Almost nobody is. There was a first injury, a first loss, a first night he did not know where to sleep, a first time he used because the body wanted silence, a first time he promised himself it would not become the pattern. Then the pattern became the day. Find relief, avoid withdrawal, protect the bag, watch the wound, stay awake, get to the hospital, leave too soon, start over. Earlier, I asked what traps someone first. For Daniel, the answer is not one thing. It is the loop. The drug traps the body. Withdrawal traps the schedule. Trauma traps the nervous system. The street traps recovery. Shame traps the voice that might ask for help again. That is the open secret of this crisis. The drug names keep changing. The street keeps the same wounds. And the most disturbing part is that for many Americans, the road into this loop did not begin in an alley. It began with something legal. The reveal is not that people use drugs on the street. America already knows that. The reveal is where some of those stories began. But for many Americans, one road into dependence did not begin in an alley. It began with pain, a back injury, a surgery, a work accident, a car crash, a pill bottle with a legal label, a doctor trying to treat something real. Then came tolerance, then a higher dose, then the prescription changed, then the body did not. That is where the countdown begins. First pain was treated, then dependence grew. Then the street became the treatment plan. The crisis did not begin outside. For many, it ended there. A prescription, a lost room, a sidewalk. That is the part America still struggles to say out loud. Some people did not fall into addiction because they ignored medicine. They fell because medicine touched them first, then left them with a body that still wanted relief. That does not erase personal responsibility. It does not mean every doctor acted carelessly. It does not mean every prescription became addiction. But it does mean the story is more complicated than weakness. When people ask why someone does not simply stop, they often ask from a place where stopping has a bed underneath it, a locked door, a bathroom, clean sheets, a phone charger, a ride to the clinic, someone nearby. If the body starts to shake, stopping outside is different. Withdrawal outside is vomiting without privacy, shaking without safety, pain without a bed, sweating through clothes you cannot wash, and trying to stay alive while your own body feels like an enemy. That is why the crisis is not chemical alone. It is architectural, medical, economic, emotional. A system of doors that open separately while the person needs all of them at once. Daniel's wristband says he found one door, but one door was not enough. The drug matters. The withdrawal matters. The trauma matters. But the street turns all of it into survival. And once recovery has to happen outside, even the right answer can arrive too late. The next part of this crisis does not always have one name. Benzodiazepines are legal medications prescribed for anxiety, insomnia, seizures, and panic. For many people, they are used under medical supervision and serve a real purpose. But in the overdose crisis, they can become dangerous when mixed with opioids, especially when opioids are already unpredictable. The danger is sedation stacked on sedation. Breathing slowed by one substance, then slowed further by another. A body with too little margin. A person outside exhausted alone, or surrounded by people too overwhelmed to know what is happening. This is where the public story becomes too clean. We like single causes. One drug, one bad choice, one diagnosis, one arrest, one solution. But the street does not separate crises into clean categories. Polysubstance use is difficult to treat from a distance because the body may bring more than one crisis through the door. A person may use opioids to avoid withdrawal, a stimulant to stay awake, a sedative to calm panic, or whatever is available to get through the next hour. That does not make the mix safe. It makes the desperation visible. The wristband gave Daniel one category: patient. Outside, he becomes something else again. A problem in public. A man people step around. A case too complicated for the hour available. That is what the overdose mix reveals. The crisis is not one substance moving through one body. It is multiple systems failing the same person at the same time. And when viewers ask the question, many people are already thinking, why does he not just stop? The honest answer has to be more difficult than blame or excuse. This is where the story needs honesty. Isn't drug use a choice? The answer cannot be a slogan. Yes, choices are involved. People make decisions. People harm themselves. People harm families. People scare neighbors. People use drugs in public spaces where children walk, businesses operate, and residents are trying to live ordinary lives. That is real. A parent is not wrong for wanting a park to feel safe. A shop owner is not wrong for wanting customers to reach the door. A transit rider is not wrong for feeling afraid when a platform becomes an emergency room. A city is not wrong for saying public drug use, violence, trafficking, fires, and untreated medical crises cannot simply be accepted as normal street life. Compassion cannot mean looking away. But punishment alone does not become treatment. And disgust does not become recovery. A person can be responsible for choices and still be trapped in a system that makes every better choice harder. Because addiction changes choice. Withdrawal changes choice. Trauma changes choice. Sleeping outside changes choice. Being discharged to a sidewalk changes choice. Having no place to store medication changes choice. Daniel is not innocent in every part of his story. No honest documentary should pretend that. But he is also not only a bad decision. He is a person moving through doors that open separately. The hospital door opens. The shelter door closes. The detox bed is across town. The appointment is tomorrow. The wound needs care today. The body wants relief now. The street is open all night. That is the brutal advantage the street has over the system. It is always available. The dealer is easier to find than the doctor. The sidewalk has fewer forms than the clinic. The crisis does not wait for business hours. So when people ask why he does not just stop, the real question becomes harder. Stop where? With what bed? With what medication? With what wound care? With what transportation? With what person sitting beside him when withdrawal begins? None of this excuses public disorder. It explains why it keeps returning when the response is only enforcement, only emergency rooms, or only moral judgment. A city can clear a sidewalk. A hospital can discharge a patient. A judge can order treatment. A police officer can move someone along. But if no usable system is waiting, Daniel does not disappear. He loops back to the sidewalk, back to the wound, back to the wristband, back to the question everyone can see, but nobody wants to hold. What replaces the street when the street has become the emergency room? So what actually works? Not as a campaign promise. What works when Daniel is standing outside with a wound on his arm, withdrawal in his body, shame in his throat, and a hospital wristband proving the system touched him but did not hold him? The answer is not one door. It is a chain. Street outreach that knows his name. A crisis team that can respond before the ambulance is the only option. wound care that follows him after discharge, medication-assisted treatment that starts quickly, not 3 weeks from now, a detox bed that does not vanish before he can reach it, a shelter bed that can handle addiction, not only punish it, mental health care that does not require a stable life before treating instability, housing that is not treated as a reward for already being recovered, and someone whose job is to make sure Daniel does not fall between every system because each system says the next one is responsible. That is the part America keeps underbuilding. Continuity. We build emergency rooms. We build jail cells. We build hotlines. We build intake forms. We build waiting lists. But the crisis lives in the handoff. Hospital to sidewalk. Detox to shelter. Shelter to street. Street to ambulance. Ambulance to discharge. Discharge to the same corner where the overdose began. Every handoff is a place where a person can disappear. Daniel does not need a perfect system. He needs a system that does not drop him at the exact moment his risk is highest. Recovery cannot begin with a locked door. It cannot begin with a voicemail. It cannot begin with comeback Monday. It cannot begin with discharge papers that assume he has somewhere clean to go. Recovery begins when the first step is reachable. When the person in crisis does not have to solve transportation paperwork, withdrawal wound care, fear and shame before help starts. This does not mean there are no rules. That is why the solution is not only more treatment, it is treatment connected to shelter, shelter connected to medical care connected to mental health connected to housing, and housing connected to someone who follows up tomorrow. Because Daniel's crisis is not separated into departments. His body does not know which agency owns the problem. If the crisis is connected, the response has to be connected too. Otherwise, the street remains the one system that never closes. America is already paying for this crisis. The question is not whether the country spends money. The question is when it spends it. Before the overdose or after the ambulance arrives. Before the wound becomes infected or after the emergency room has to treat it. Before someone loses the room or after the sidewalk becomes the only place left. Doing nothing is not free. It only moves the bill. Daniel's wristband is part of that bill. An emergency room visit, a discharge a wound that still needs care, a shelter system that may not have a bed, an outreach worker trying to find him again, and a sidewalk where the crisis becomes visible to everyone. This is what America often mistakes for savings. And the cost is not only public money, it is public trust. Residents stop believing the city can manage disorder. Business owners stop believing anyone is listening. Parents avoid parks. Transit riders avoid platforms. Nurses see the same patient return again and again. Police become the default response to medical problems. This is not only happening in one city. In Philadelphia, outreach workers face wounds tied to a changing drug supply. In Los Angeles, overdose shelter and sidewalk survival collide under freeway shadows. In rural Appalachia, the same wristband can lead back to a trailer, a car, or nowhere at all. The street is becoming the ward. That is the cost of doing too little too late. A hospital becomes the front door. A sidewalk becomes the waiting room. A tent becomes the recovery bed. A police call becomes the care plan. And the person at the center becomes harder for everyone to see as a patient. Maybe the answer is that America built a system where all of them can take turns holding the same person down. And that brings us to Daniel himself. Not as a symbol, as a mirror. By the time most people see Daniel, they have already decided what story he belongs to. Addict, homeless man, public nuisance, patient, victim, criminal, failure, warning. But Daniel is not one word. No one is. He is the man with the fading hospital wristband. The man who was seen once, then lost again. The man who knows which public bathrooms are usually unlocked. The man who knows which bus stop has enough light to feel safer, but not so much light that someone complains. The man who knows a hospital can save his life at midnight and send him back into the same conditions by morning. He is not a symbol because symbols are too clean. Daniel is messier than that. He has made choices that hurt him. He has missed chances. He has lied. He has left places he should have stayed. He has stayed in places that almost killed him. He has wanted help and refused help in the same week, sometimes in the same day. That is what addiction and homelessness do together. They make a person look contradictory from the outside. From the inside, the contradiction often has a logic. He wants treatment. He fears withdrawal. He wants shelter. He fears theft. He wants to stop. He fears what stopping will feel like with no bed underneath him. He wants people to see him. He fears what they will think when they do. This is why the easiest story is usually the least honest one. If Daniel is only a victim, we miss the harm around him. If he is only a criminal, we miss the medical crisis inside him. If he is only an addict, we miss the housing failure underneath him. If he is only homeless, we miss the trauma shaping every hour. The truth is harder. Daniel is a person standing where multiple American failures meet, a medical system that saves emergencies better than it sustains recovery, a housing market that punishes instability, a treatment system with doors that open too late, a shelter system that cannot always absorb the people most in need of care, a public safety system forced to respond when every other system has already missed its chance. So here is the action. Look at your own city with questions. When someone leaves the emergency room with nowhere to sleep, where do they go? When someone wants detox tonight, is there a bed tonight? When someone has a wound, who checks it tomorrow? When someone is using in public, is the response only removal, or is there a path that actually leads somewhere? When a shelter says no, what door opens next? Ask those questions locally. Ask your city council. Ask your county health department. Ask the hospital systems whose emergency rooms see the same people return. Ask anyone who promises safety without explaining what replaces the street. Because safety is not only the absence of tents. Safety is the presence of a system that works before the tent appears. 5 years from now, America will either be the country that turns sidewalks into permanent emergency rooms, or the country that finally built doors recovery could reach. The choice in some small way is also yours. Daniel looks down at the wristband again. The plastic is almost loose enough to fall off. And that brings us to the final question. What does America do with someone after it proves he is still alive? What does America do with someone after it proves he is still alive? That is the question Daniel leaves behind. Because the hospital did prove something. It proved he had a name. It proved his pulse could be found. It proved his wound could be examined. It proved his crisis was real enough to enter a chart. For a few hours, Daniel was not invisible. He was a patient, a person with a wristband, a person with numbers on a screen, a person with a bed under him, even if only for a little while. Then the door opened again, and outside the country asked him to recover in the place where he had already fallen apart. That is not only Daniel's story, it is the story of a system that can respond to emergencies faster than it can prevent them. A system that can measure overdose deaths, count tents, track arrests, log ambulance calls, print discharge papers, fund pilots, announce initiatives, clear blocks, open hotlines, close beds, and still fail to answer the simplest human question. Where does a sick person go when sickness does not end at discharge? The street has become America's waiting room. The sidewalk has become the place where untreated pain addiction, trauma, poverty, public fear, and policy failure all stand in the same line. Daniel is still outside. The wristband is still there. The plastic is loose now. The letters are almost gone. But the meaning has not disappeared. Someone saw him. Someone treated him. Someone released him. And after that, the country became harder to find. Maybe that is why the wristband matters. Not because it saved him, because it proves how close he came to being saved. Close to care, close to a bed, close to a system, close to a door. But close is not the same as safe. And survival is not the same as recovery. So the next time you see someone like Daniel on a sidewalk at a bus stop outside a hospital, under a bridge, or near a shelter, the question is not only what drug got him there, the question is what system could have met him sooner? What door closed too early? What handoff failed? What kind of help arrived as an emergency because it never arrived as prevention? And what kind of country keeps asking people to heal in the same place that keeps making them sick. If we can prove a person is alive, can we build a system that helps him stay that way? Until then, the hospital will keep seeing him. The street will keep keeping him. And the wristband will keep telling the truth. America did not fail to notice Daniel. It noticed him. Then it let him go. Disclaimer. This documentary is for educational and journalistic purposes only. It discusses homelessness, poverty, mental health, addiction-related issues, housing policy, and public spending. Composite characters are based on patterns from public records, housing research, shelter data, court filings, and published case studies. They are not intended to identify any specific private individual. This video does not promote illegal activity, drug use, harassment, or harmful behavior. Some footage has been edited or blurred for privacy, safety, and compliance with YouTube community guidelines.